Welcome back, everybody. My name is Aaron Scott. I'm the executive editor of the Science and Environment team, which means Oregon Field Guide and All Science No Fiction. And this second panel, if that first one, we talked a lot about being a little bit stuck in the past, looking in the rearview mirror. This panel is about looking forward. It is about the future. It is about some of the really exciting and amazing technologies that are coming along that might help with the issue of getting a lot more energy on the grid if they can get here in time, which is a big if that we're going to be talking about. But before we begin, we actually have two short little videos that we're going to play for you about two of those technologies, wave energy and geothermal. And we will play those first and then start talking with our panelists one by one as we move through the technologies.
Did you know you can generate renewable power using heat from deep within the Earth's crust? It's called geothermal energy. You might have already enjoyed some of its uses right here in Oregon, like a natural hot spring soak after a long hike. Now, a company in Central Oregon is trying to figure out how to harness enough energy to power our homes by using
super hot rocks.
OPB got a first look into how Mazama Energy, along with its partners, is hoping to supercharge geothermal energy. The company is drilling wells nearly 2 miles deep beneath the Earth's surface and then injecting water into an engineered hot rock reservoir.
So it's 2 miles down, 3 kilometers, 10,000 feet. At the bottom of this 10,000 feet well, this is what we call the artificial reservoir.
When the water gets that deep, it absorbs the Earth's natural heat and becomes extremely hot. As it returns to the surface, it turns into steam and drives a turbine to generate electricity. Then the steam is cooled, converted back into water, and re-injected into the reservoir, allowing the cycle to continue. This type of enhanced geothermal system is called super hot rock.
Super hot rock, yeah.
Mazama Energy hopes to prove this geothermal technology can extract heat from rocks to harness energy and can also ensure it's reliable and affordable to do so. And that might help Oregon and other places power homes and businesses with a new kind of renewable energy. Check out our story at opb.org.
There's enough available energy in the waves off Oregon alone to power 6.4 million homes. That's more homes than in Oregon and Washington combined. PacWave is a place where experimental wave energy converters can be tested out in the open ocean. It'll have the largest capacity of any wave energy test facility in the world.
People actually really like the idea of wave energy. Lots of people come to the beach, a lot of people live along the coast. They can see and experience the power of the waves. So the idea of trying to capture that energy is a concept they can grasp pretty quickly.
One way that energy travels through our world is through waves, and ocean waves are no exception. The amount of energy in a wave depends on its height or amplitude and how fast it travels. And some of the most energy-rich waves in the world can be found right here in the Pacific Northwest.
Jes, I just realized that I forgot to grab the waves. I was going to bring the waves, and we could all do a photo shoot with the waves that Jes built, and I forgot them because we were too busy filming with the high school marching band today for a future story about liquefaction.
Stay tuned.
Coming online in a couple of months. So I want to begin, we're going to be a little bit different from the last panel in that we're going to kind of go one energy source by the other, and I want to begin with wave energy and Jes Burns, who is OPB's science producer and the host of the show All Science No Fiction. Jes, can you introduce us to wave energy? How does it work?
Well, as you heard, energy travels in waves, right? And we want to harness that energy. So basically what we want to do is we want to take that slow up and down motion of ocean waves. There's a few different ways to do it on the coast, or you could be further out, like right on the coast, the breaker kind of thing, or you could be out in the ocean. And what you need to do is you need to turn that slow up and down energy into basically fast motion to spin one of those turbines and generate electricity. Oregon has a lot of good waves off its coast a lot of the year. And so wave energy is one of those really interesting energies that it could be complementary to other energies because there's waves in the day, there's waves in the night, there's waves in the winter when there's not as much sun, there's waves in the summer when there's not as much wind, as we heard. So it is a nice, and it can be forecast. You know what waves are going to come a long way in advance. So there's some advantages there for it being used as a supplementary energy source.
And I remember writing about it back in 2011, covering some researchers at OSU who told me at the time, we're just like a couple of years, we're going to have generators that are going to be tested out in the ocean. And here we are 15 years later, and we are still kind of developing the site to test some of these generators. Can you kind of tell us where we are in terms of wave energy becoming a reality?
Yeah, there's a couple different things in play. So PacWave is now officially online. There's just no one out in the ocean testing right now. A lot of that has to do with just the complexities of getting projects funded, some disruptions in funding that came with the newest administration. A lot of different things in play right there, but basically, that connects to the other aspect of it is if you close your eyes and you think about a wind turbine, I'm pretty sure everyone is thinking that same exact technology, right? You got a post, for lack of the actual term, sorry, wind developers in the building, and you have the blades, and there's 3 of them, and they spin, and they'll tilt, and they'll turn. But pretty much everyone has agreed, and maybe hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of technology development of windmills has brought us to this design, a convergent design that this is what we need. And they can get big, they can be small, but basically you're kind of going to see the same thing. Wave energy hasn't been there yet. Like, we haven't converged on the best design. And there may not be one best design because a design that works well in Oregon's waves may not be the best in Hawaii's waves. Or maybe your purpose is for a small generator versus trying to get something to utility scale. And Jason will say something about that. But basically, the technology isn't quite there yet. And one of the reasons the technology isn't there is there hasn't really been places to test. And that's where PacWave wants to come in. There's a few spots. Scotland's got a big testing facility. Doesn't have a lot of grid connectivity, though it's a big area. Hawaii's got a berth that's run by the Navy. Southern California, a testing facility is coming online there. But basically, Oregon State has a place for 4 different developers off the coast. Each one of those berths, which are basically empty areas of ocean, there's a way for people to deploy wave buoys, plug into a cable, and have that electricity pull back and actually feed onto the grid, which is a big part of it. One thing is, can you generate electricity, but how does that electricity behave as it comes back, and all of the different pieces that it takes to get it back to land to feed onto the grid? And that is where the PacWave, they hope to fill that goal by streamlining the process for getting wave energy devices into the ocean to test.
And you mentioned Jason Busch. Our next guest is the executive director of the Pacific Ocean Energy Trust. And Jason, I'd love to, could you put PacWave and kind of America into the global perspective when it comes to wave energy and marine energy?
Sure. First of all, I'd say the PacWave puts America on par with what we've seen in Europe, where they've been at this for several more years than we have. put a lot more money into it. They've had grid-connected test facilities in Scotland for almost 20 years. There have been many machines that have been deployed. So in the United States, we've not had what we call a fully permitted, grid-connected open ocean, like the full brunt of the Pacific Ocean, to test a wave energy machine. So this is a big deal. PacWave is federally funded. Almost $100 million gone into that project. Up to 20 megawatts of capacity, so machines can produce up to 20 megawatts to put on the grid. They're going to be selling that onto the grid, so this is kind of a first in the United States. And OSU manages PacWave, and this is a pretty big deal, and we hope to see machines in the water connected in 2027.
And I mean, just think about having a wind turbine on land, right? It's on the land, the wind blows, and that's what it is. A solar panel is mounted on the ground's not changing much. Think about the open ocean. You have storms. You could get 40, 50-foot waves off the coast of Oregon, right, during the winter. You have salt water, and machinery don't get along. You have just all of these varying conditions. The ocean is a very harsh place, and so open water testing is at a premium for eventually getting this kind of technology online.
We think of it, and we talk about TRL levels, technology readiness levels, 1 through 9. 1 is, I have an idea. 9 is, it's commercially viable, and it's a military thing. It's ready to hand to a soldier and go out in the field. So the industry is sitting somewhere in the 6 to 8 range right now. There are a number of companies that have full-scale machines. They work, they've been deployed, but there are a lot of other challenges that face the industry. I'm happy to get into some of those. Jes knows them well. But I think it's important to point out that wave energy is a supplemental energy resource. David Brown is on the right path. He's developing solar and storage and terrestrial wind. This works. We can already do that. The cost curve has already been traversed. It's already super low. In fact, it's one of the least, some of the least cost resources. So we can keep going down that path, and we should as quickly as we can. These other generation forms, wave, offshore wind, hydrogen, geothermal, all the rest, they're all important, but I think they're going to play a secondary role. And I'll finish that thought by saying, when we first started doing wave energy, it certainly was thought that this was going to be a utility scale sector. I don't think that's going to happen. I think what we've realized is that for a variety of reasons, wave energy, tidal energy, ocean currents, and ocean thermal exchange, OTEC, will all play some role, but they'll be fairly niche markets that they can serve. And one of the images that I most like is the idea of community scale projects. So imagine a Port Orford or a small community on the coast in Washington, Oregon, that decides that they want 3 to 5 megawatts of generation that they own. They buy those machines, they put them out in the water, they're right there, you can see them, they take up a relatively small footprint, they're fairly reliable, they put enough power onto the grid that community can likely use that energy and serve most of their load most of the time. Combine that with storage, and all of a sudden you have a highly more resilient grid out on the coast that is subject to a variety of problems associated with large transmission lines moving power a long way, wildfires, ice, storms, falling trees, et cetera. And so I think it could really help on the reliability aspect for the energy sector.
Yeah, and that may help with the NIMBY thing that we were talking about. When people are having projects for their communities, it feels like, at least to me, that that's a good recipe for getting people on board for those projects, because you're building it for yourself, right?
I mean, we heard in your video, Jes, that there's enough power to, power 6.4 million homes. Jason, why don't you think that it can be a utility scale power source? What have we learned, or what is the challenge for it being large scale?
2 things. Number 1, a wave energy machine has to function in almost all respects as a function of the size of the machine relative to the wave. It has to be moved up and down in that trough of that wave. If you have a machine, in other words, if you keep building an ever larger machine, then it stabilizes and becomes a flat platform. A wind turbine, on the other hand, can get can always get bigger, and the output is a function of the cube of the windswept area, which means your output really goes up the bigger it is, and this is a real efficiency advantage. Wave energy doesn't work that way. So maybe a megawatt-ish for any given wave energy machine. They'll probably creep that up as efficiencies improve over the years, but you can use a megawatt as a round number for what you can get from one machine. So the question is, how many machines do you want to put in your ocean? 3 to 5 is one thing, 50, 100 is quite a different, and impacts and concerns with existing users is a big deal on the coast. None of this is a welcome addition to the already busy ocean environment.
And you had mentioned, both of you, wind turbines. There are offshore wind turbines where wind and marine energy meet. Can you talk a little bit about that, Jason, of kind of, I mean, I know the window for opportunity for offshore wind closed in Oregon here in 2024. What does the future hold for it here in the States?
That's a tough question, and I wish I could say that it was. I was feeling optimistic. The reality is, offshore wind has again developed around the world and left the United States behind. Europe is the leader. China is actually now the leader. They have more installed wind capacity than all of Europe combined, and they show no signs of slowing. The United States has barely started. We've stuck our proverbial toe in the water on the East Coast. And unfortunately, the current administration has called a dislike for offshore wind, and they've done everything they can to just stop it. It's continuing to move slowly, but the reality is the sector has left the United States. These are all European developers. These are multi-billion-dollar investments, and they've been very clear with us that there's safer, better places to invest their limited resources than the United States. Now, with all that said, I was very active in California where I first got involved with offshore wind, and it was fascinating to watch that process play out. When we first began speaking with leadership in California, skepticism was probably the most common sentiment we ran into. But within about 2 years of hard work and education, I think California's leadership realized that offshore wind offered an enormous opportunity for new generation. And that the technology was tracking very quickly. What we already have well developed around the world is bottom-mounted wind energy technologies. They literally mount it to the seabed, and that's good out to about 60 meters. Beyond that, issues start to arise, and you move into floating wind energy, and floating works. It boggles the mind to see such a large turbine sitting on a floating triangular platform, stable in a very rough sea state. But it works. And there are a variety of technologies that are still in development. They're kind of competing who's going to have the most efficient machine to do this. So California is banking on it. They embraced offshore wind. They set some very aggressive goals, 5 gigawatts by 2030, 25 gigawatts of development by 2045. And they have put their money where their mouth is. They have invested heavily in port infrastructure, transmission, and for example, out of Humboldt to bring power from the Eureka area and Humboldt area into the main transmission lines. And they, even under the current federal landscape, they've continued to focus and push. And the expectation is that some of the projects, there are 5 leased sites already in California. Probably not all of those will survive the 4 years, but I think some of them will, and they will get built. What does that mean for Oregon? I think that our window closed in October 2024 because that's when we had an auction that was supposed to lease some areas off of Oregon, and it didn't happen. There was the federal agency that oversees that decided that there was inadequate competitive interest. There was one bidder, and so they withdrew the lease, the auction. And I think a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief for that. The fishing community, some coastal communities, environmental community, tribes, who felt like offshore wind somehow was moving too quickly and that they had unanswered questions. When will the window open up for us again? If we have a different administration in 2028, the window will crack open. But it will take years to reestablish the capacity at the agency level to process the permits. And then we'll have to do something to convince the industry to come back to the United States and invest their dollars. Because unless we do something that ensures that permits are not revoked arbitrarily, or arbitrary and capricious, or a violation of due process, or the legal standards they keep losing on. It still doesn't help the industry. If you're investing your $1 billion, you can win in court and still not get to build your project, which is kind of what's happening. So the hope is we have a change in administration in the future. We have a change in how we approach offshore wind and recognize it for the resource that it is, because it is massive. It could put a lot of gigawatts of high-quality, reliable generation onto the grid at a time when we're talking about, needing 9, 10 gigawatts. That's just Oregon. You look at the whole Pacific Northwest and West Coast, and we're looking in the hundreds of gigawatts of new capacity over the next 20 or 30 years. So it could play a really important role in that long-term view.
And I'm curious, in addition to being the executive director of the Pacific Ocean Energy Trust, you are also the outgoing chair of the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. And so the Pacific Northwest won a $1 billion federal award. $1 billion with a B. To create a hydrogen hub that was then revoked last month. Where do things stand for renewable hydrogen now?
This is supposed to be the
I know, this is the uplifting panel.
I know, this is like,
we'll get there. Unfortunately, most of the good stuff.
Yeah, most of the stuff I work on is, it's tough right now. I just to be straight, it's tough. But what I will say is that, in addition to the amazing renewable resources we have in this region, we also have another resource, and that's people. And I've seen some people in the audience today I know well, and they are extremely knowledgeable and passionate about this. And I think that if we can get around to putting their good ideas into work, into application, we can overcome some of the many challenges that we have in this state. So I think it's important that we focus on the capacities that we do have. Hydrogen, we did lose the $1 billion for the hub, which was in Washington, but there were a number of organizations, the RHA, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance, one being one of many, that were part of that hub. And unfortunately, as a result of that, supply chain and other investors that were starting to move into the region to build on that hydrogen hub concept, of which there were several around the country. California also lost theirs. Obviously, there's been some retraction. But we had a board meeting this morning. I'm now an emeritus member. I get to sit and listen and learn, but I don't have to do anything. It was great. And what I heard this morning is, it was a gut punch, and it's going to set us back. I kind of think of it as sort of the adoption curve, getting pushed down the x-axis of time a bit. We're going to do this. It's kind of an obvious thing in so many ways. But it's just going to get pushed out a few years, and hopefully we can retain the organizations and the passion and the capacity to re-engage when the opportunity represents itself, because things like hydrogen, like offshore wind and marine energy are all good answers to some of the troubling problems that we have as a society. So still enthusiastic. I think it will happen, but at a slower pace for the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you. Next, we are going to move on to nuclear and small modular reactors with Antonio Sierra, who is OPB's Rural Communities Reporter based in Pendleton, where this is a big topic with all the data centers, particularly on the Washington side, since we do have a law against it here on the Oregon side. Can you tell us a little bit, to begin with, basically what is a small modular reactor, and what are the benefits that are being touted that would make it a good addition to the energy portfolio?
Yeah, I like to think of it as kind of a new spin on an old concept. So nuclear energy has been around for decades, so I think probably since the World War II era. And the idea for SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors, has been floating around for a while, but it's really kind of accelerated over the past few years as tech companies have gotten interested in data centers and artificial intelligence. I think you've heard over and over and over again how energy intensive data centers are. And I think tech companies are attracted to the idea of small modular nuclear reactors because it's in the name, right? It's in the adjective. It's smaller, it's at a smaller scale, and one of the biggest obstacles to nuclear energy has been the cost. There's a reason why there isn't a nuclear reactor all over the place. So I think there is the most recent nuclear reactor project in Georgia went billions of dollars over its budget. And so the idea behind SMRs is that they can solve this and make it cheaper while still harnessing kind of the massive amount of power that nuclear energy produces. So I've been told that there are energy nerds in the crowd, so I'm gonna reference numbers real quick, and I apologize if they're a little outdated. But a full-scale nuclear energy reactor, kind of the ones that you see on like The Simpsons or something, that is
Inspired by Trojan.
Yes.
In our own backyard.
Right. So that can produce up to 1,000 megawatts of power. It's a huge amount of energy. An SMR is kind of projected to produce 50 to 300 megawatts, and that sounds like much less, but if you think about other forms of low carbon energy, those are even smaller than that, right? A single wind turbine can produce about 3 megawatts of energy, 10 acres of solar panels, about 1 megawatt. And so they're obviously attracted to the big number, right? And their ability to power their data centers with this new technology. I think the other thing that makes them attractive is that they're cheaper to build, right? You know, being small and being modular, having the ability to have them build out off-site. So I really kind of stumbled into the nuclear energy debate, but I'm in Eastern Oregon, and Eastern Oregon is one of Amazon's biggest data center sites in Umatilla and Morrow counties, and they're incredibly excited about this. They've done a huge PR push, and they're really hoping to get these online soon.
And so, I mean, the idea is that they could be built, because they're modular, like built off-site, put on site. It would be kind of scale because they're being built somewhere else and then located at each data center or place that needs them. As you said, like we have nuclear power plants. In theory, we should be able to make small modular plants really easily, and yet there aren't really any yet. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of what is the status? What is still being figured out, and how far off are they potentially?
Right. So it's mostly still a concept rather than something that is happening right now. There are a few SMRs that are online, and I think in Russia and China, but analysis of those SMRs have shown that they're very costly and aren't operating very well. And even people that are really optimistic about this technology say that we might not see them until the 2030s at the earliest. So it's at least a little ways out, if not much longer. And I think you mentioned as well, Aaron, we literally cannot build any nuclear facilities right now. Back in 1980.
In Oregon.
In Oregon, yes. Important caveat there. So Oregon voters passed a ballot measure back in 1980 that prohibited any new nuclear facilities to be built in Oregon unless there was some sort of nuclear disposal site that was certified by the federal government. That has not happened in the past 45 or so years. So after Trojan went down, there was no new nuclear sites, and it remains that way today. So there's kind of there've been efforts to undo that, but there's a kind of a reason why Amazon has planned their SMR project the way it is. Their idea is to build those reactors in southeastern Washington, then transmit that power to Eastern Oregon to power all of their data centers. So it's an added layer of complexity to it.
What I think is so interesting about nuclear at the moment is it's undergone a really interesting shift in that historically it united environmentalists against it. And yet now there's a lot of people who have come around to nuclear because they see it as a very necessary way to combat climate change. And kind of the argument that, we haven't figured out what to do with nuclear waste, but it at least isn't emitting massive amounts of carbon, and that will hopefully help us combat climate change. Can you talk about kind of, and then I've definitely heard people who feel like it's a greenwashing of an old technology and that we're just putting a kind of fresh coat of sustainability paint on something that has huge environmental costs. Can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons there of it's not carbon free. There's huge costs to mining nuclear fuel, and there's huge costs to building these facilities. There's lots of other kind of pollutants from nuclear power. Can you talk about where it fits in whether it's environmentally friendly or where it fits into kind of this question of sustainability?
Yeah, I said it is controversial in terms of being a low carbon energy source. I think people who are proponents of it would say, listen, if climate change is truly an existential crisis, we need to draw low carbon energy from as many sources as possible. And if nuclear is one of those options, so be it, let's invest in it. But there are still a lot of environmental concerns about it. I think one of the interesting things about nuclear energy is that it's probably one of the few forms of low carbon energy that has a lot of Republican support. If you look at the bills that come through the legislature every year, there's at least a few bills from Republicans that want to kind of repeal or weaken the ban on nuclear facilities in Oregon. President Trump has been very supportive of nuclear facilities. There was just a report from NPR a few days ago that the Trump administration is trying to secretly slash nuclear regulations. So it does have a lot of conservative support. However, there is a lot of environmental concern. I think a lot of people in the crowd are probably familiar with the various nuclear meltdowns that have happened all over the world: Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima. When you talk to people who are supportive of SMRs, they say that is much less of a possibility with SMRs because of their smaller size. But those are people from the industry, right? They profit from nuclear energy. As Aaron alluded to, there still isn't a place to put nuclear waste, right? Nuclear waste can be incredibly harmful to your health and to your safety. And the example that people like to cite is that Hanford, the Hanford site is right around the area where Amazon wants to build small modular nuclear reactors. And that is one of the worst nuclear pollution sites because the federal government used it as a nuclear production facility back in the World War II era. So there are a lot of concerns around that. There is a lot of debate around that. And I think when you talk to opponents, one of the big things they say is that, if these companies are really concerned with the climate, and Amazon has its own internal climate pledge about producing less carbon, they would spend a lot less time investing in these data centers and invest in other things. So yeah, it's a tough one.
Monica, super hot rocks.
Super hot rocks.
Super hot rocks in 1 minute. No, geothermal isn't new per se. Would you tell us a little bit about where it's actually used in the Pacific Northwest? Because I was fascinated to find out that it powers a couple of places.
Well, I don't know if many people know, but down in Klamath Falls, Oregon Tech has been using geothermal since 1964. They've been using it to power the school down there. Lakeview, I also saw, has been using geothermal for a while. And the reason it works there is because there's conventional geothermal, and then there's, what Mazama Energy is doing, which is artificial. So conventional, it's worked there because they can drill enough to get to a point where they're harnessing this heat, and there's like this natural reservoir. So that cycle that we saw that Mazama is creating. And hopefully, if this company is successful, because they're drilling really deep, and I want to say like 2 miles, maybe 3 miles deep, to try to harness the heat from that deep, bring it up with the steam. If that's successful, that means that, geothermal is not going to be locked into just certain places around the country. So that would be able to unlock it to be used maybe even here or nearby in Portland, kind of maybe around the Cascadia mountain range. So it's something that a lot of people are excited for.
It's funny talking to you all. I forget how unique the Northwest is in that we have incredible wave energy. We have an incredible history with kind of nuclear energy and creating and developing nuclear energy, but then also we have this incredible geothermal energy from being on the Ring of Fire and all of our volcanic activity. We are a hotbed of energy here in the Pacific Northwest across all of the different forms. So tell us a little bit, where is the company at, and what is kind of the ramp to potentially making geothermal something that would be powering cities and homes across a wide scale?
So they are currently located outside of Bend, Sun River in the area there, and they have a really small patch of land. Pad 29 is what they call it, and really it's just, there's all this equipment, but you just see like this drill. That's all what it is, this drill and like the pool that you saw there. So what they're doing right now is testing to see if they're successful drilling super deep. If that's successful, then the next step is to kind of, generate some power for like commercial. And if that's successful, they're thinking that it could be utility scale, maybe not as big as powering, a whole city like Portland, but in rural places like that, it would work really well to have geothermal powering their homes instead of, using up land for solar or wind. The good thing about geothermal is that it's an infinite source. It's constantly going, and it's compared to natural gas because it's just there. It's available. So it's a really big plus. It's just people. Yeah.
And kind of like Antonio mentioned with nuclear, geothermal, I believe, is also interesting in that it has interest and buy-in from Republicans and from the Trump administration. Is that correct? What is it about it that like kind of separates it from solar and wind as kind of like a renewable energy that can appeal across partisan lines?
Mainly it's because it's similar to drilling with oil and gas. It's using the same technology. When I was reporting on this story, I talked to someone, they're like, yeah, the administration loves it because it's just, we're drilling holes, it's essentially fracking, but we're not extracting anything. If any, they're injecting the water in there to harness that heat. Right now it's doing really well. It's getting funding. But I don't want to jinx it. It just feels like it's one of the things that's just kind of moving along right now.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
One of the things that the Trump administration has been very clear about is their preference for so-called baseload generation sources. Coal, nuclear, hydro, geothermal. It runs 24/7. It's dispatchable. And I think that's a big deal. So intermittent resources, wind, solar, wave, you have to approach that differently. And there's still a lot of folks who just can't see past that intermittency. It's sort of a truism in the industry. It's fascinating. It was a decade ago, grid operators were saying things like, well, the grid could never absorb more than 10 or 20% of intermittent resources on the grid. And of course, we've blown past that. There are nations and states that have gone 100% for days on end. So we blow past these technological barriers. But for a lot of folks, it's still a really big deal. Baseload is still their mindset, even though modern people studying energy and thinking about it, it's a concept. We know what it means, but it's not nearly as relevant as it used to be.
Before we wrap up, do any of you have other responses, other thoughts on the technologies that we've discussed?
Antonio, how safety-wise, so Fukushima, what's the comparison for a small nuclear reactor if it actually melts down?
Yeah, I mean, it's so conceptual, right? I don't think we really know what would happen if an SMR melted down and what would happen. We knew it would probably be dangerous, right? Would it have the same radius? Would it have the same effects? I don't know that. But again, that's something where the industry really can test it and says that the risk mitigation is way down, that it's maybe not non-existent, but a lot less risky than a traditional nuclear reactor. However, there's still that risk, right? You're working with a very volatile, very strong source of power. I think that remains to be seen.
I want to say something about floating offshore wind. Oregon is actually preparing or currently working right now on an offshore wind roadmap. So when the moment does come that the, new administration and, they like floating offshore wind, that's an idea. By the time that could happen, the state has this roadmap and has this okay, if we decide to move forward with, this section along the coast, this is kind of what it should look like, and if we see that it's not working out, there's like off ramps. And within that roadmap, I believe that they're also looking at community benefit agreements to kind of benefit, kind of what we were hearing Tony talk about earlier. It's just like we're generating all of this electricity in these rural parts of the state, and they're not getting any benefits, right? With the community benefits agreement, it would allow them to be like, okay, what can we get in exchange for using our land or using the city or any of these resources there. So Oregon is at least working on that and trying to be prepared for when the opportunity does arise.
Excellent. Well, Jes, sorry, Jason, did you have?
Maybe one other concept here. First of all, I want to say this is amazing, and to see a room full of people this time of the evening to talk about energy is encouraging. And I hope that it suggests that as a society, as a state, we are starting to understand that we're at a crucial point in our development, and we are transitioning away from technologies that are, literally 19th century technologies. And we have to rebuild. First of all, they're old, and they're like an old car. Eventually, you got to buy a new one. So we got to buy some new energy stuff. And the question is, what are we going to buy? It's going to be, expensive. Everything's expensive, as you hear so much talk about impacts on ratepayers, and there are so many factors that go into that. But what I guess would leave you with is that we know how to do this. The technologies already exist. The policies are out there. There are smart people who have been talking about ways to fix these challenges for a long time. You didn't hear the phrase, regional grid today. That's a big topic that could solve a lot of challenges. It's a political decision. Politicians have to make that decision, and we can't do it. But we know how to get there. The technologies exist. We've already started. We've made some good progress. We need to keep going and ramp that up as best we can. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, consensus about large infrastructure projects is probably not the best standard for decision making. Somebody's ox has to get gored, so to speak, in order for things to change. And that's sort of a reality that we have to accept as a society. And I think that political leadership has to make hard decisions. That's what they're there for. So we do need to do some things differently. We have to make some changes. We have to make some investments. We know how to do it. Thus far, though, we've just been challenged in making those hard decisions. And I hope that as the concerns become more well understood, and unfortunately we see the implications in blackouts and wildfires, et cetera, that the public push will get stronger and folks will be able to make good decisions at the leadership level.
Thank you. Jes, Jason, Antonio, Monica, thank you all for giving us a glimpse of the future.